The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the weathered walls of the small ranch house. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains across the Montana landscape, just as it had that terrible winter 25 years ago. Cole Hartwell sat in his leather chair, worn smooth by decades of use, his hands gnarled and spotted with age, but still steady. 83 years had etched deep lines into his face, each one a story of hard living and harder choices. Across from him, 12-year-old Tommy perched on the edge of the ottoman, his young eyes fixed on the old Colt .45 that rested on the table between them. The boy's fingers hovered near the weapon, drawn to it the way all boys are drawn to the tools of men who came before. "Grandpa," Tommy said, his voice carrying that particular blend of curiosity and reverence that only the young can muster. "How many men did this gun kill?" Cole's pale blue eyes, still sharp despite his years, studied his grandson's face. The boy had his mother's earnest expression, but something of Cole's own stubbornness in the set of his jaw. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, a sound that always took Cole back to that winter, to the bridge, to the moment everything changed. "This gun was there the day 47 innocent people died at Valley Forge," Cole said, his voice like gravel scraped across stone. "It killed 6 of the men responsible. The last 6 shots I ever fired at another human being." Tommy's eyes widened. The weight of that number hung in the air between them, heavy as the snow accumulating on the roof beams. "You killed people?" The boy's voice cracked slightly. Cole shook his head, slowly, deliberately. "Not me, boy. Colonel Brennan did the killing. I just stood there and watched." He paused, letting the weight of that confession settle, and survived. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Cole reached for the gun, his fingers closing around the worn grip with the familiarity of 5 decades. He turned it over in his hands, and Tommy could see the faint engraving on the barrel, worn almost smooth by time and use. "But there was one person I thought was dead," Cole continued, his gaze distant now, looking past the walls of the cabin to something only he could see. "She came back to find me after 22 years, and she brought with her the truth that could have destroyed a nation." Tommy leaned forward, forgetting the cold, forgetting everything except the story his grandfather was about to tell. "Who was she?" Cole's throat tightened. Even now, after all these years, speaking her name aloud required effort. "My daughter, Emma, your grandmother." The boy knew his grandmother had died before he was born, but the family never spoke much about her early years. Now, watching his grandfather's face transform as memory took hold, Tommy understood why. "Tell me," Tommy whispered. Cole nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. He set the gun back on the table and settled deeper into his chair. His eyes closed for a moment, and when they opened again, it was as if he had traveled back through time, back to that winter of 1885, when snow fell like judgment and blood stained the frozen ground. "It started," Cole said, "on the coldest day I can remember." Segment 2, The Blizzard and the Arrow. The snow fell with a violence that only Montana winters can produce. Each flake was a tiny dagger of ice, driven horizontal by winds that screamed through the mountain passes like tortured souls. The temperature had dropped to 15 below zero, cold enough to freeze spit before it hit the ground, cold enough to kill a man in minutes if he wasn't careful. The wooden bridge across Creek Run groaned under the weight of accumulating ice. Icicles hung from the railings like prison bars, some as thick as a man's arm. Below, the creek that gave the crossing its name churned with dark water, swollen by snowmelt from higher elevations. Steam rose from the water's surface where it met the frigid air, creating an eerie fog that clung to the bridge deck. In the center of that bridge, suspended upside down like a slaughtered hog, hung Daniel Wade. The rope that held him was manila hemp, 3/4 of an inch thick, rated for 2,000 pounds. It was tied with a hangman's knot, professional work, and secured to the bridge's center support beam. Daniel's wrists were bound behind his back with the same rough rope, cutting into his flesh with each small movement. The water rose steadily, 1 inch per minute, relentless as death itself. It had reached his shoulders 10 minutes ago. Now it lapped at his neck, each small wave sending icy fingers across his skin. His face was purple from the blood pooling in his head, veins standing out like dark rivers on a map. His breath came in desperate gasps, each one harder than the last. The cold was worse than the drowning. At 2 degrees Celsius, the water would kill him from hypothermia before he could drown, if he was lucky. His body was already shutting down, pulling blood away from his extremities to protect his core. His fingers had gone numb 15 minutes ago. His legs no longer responded to commands. Through the curtain of snow, a figure appeared on the eastern bank. Catherine Wade, 35 years old, dressed in a heavy wool dress that was now soaked through and frozen stiff. Her boots, good leather work meant for ranch life, slipped on the icy approach to the bridge. In her right hand, she clutched a railroad lantern, the kind that burned kerosene and gave off a steady yellow light. Her auburn hair, normally pinned up in a practical bun, had come loose and now whipped around her face like Medusa's snakes. Ice crystals clung to the strands. Her breath came in white clouds, rapid and shallow, the breathing of someone pushed beyond their limits. "Daniel!" The word tore from her throat, barely audible above the storm's fury. The hanging man's head twisted at the sound. His eyes, barely able to focus, found her in the swirling white. "Catherine," he managed, his voice a croak. "No, go back." She ignored him. She always ignored him when he tried to protect her. 20 years of marriage had taught her that some battles you fight together or not at all. Her feet found purchase on the bridge's icy planks, and she pushed forward. One hand on the railing for balance, the other holding the lantern high. 20 yards from the bridge, something whistled through the air. The arrow took her in the left shoulder blade, punching through the heavy wool like it was paper. The broadhead, a 3-bladed piece of forged Damascus steel sharpened to a razor's edge, entered at a 45-degree angle downward. It sliced through the trapezius muscle, missed the scapula by a hair's breadth, and emerged 3 inches below her collarbone. The impact drove Catherine to her knees. The lantern flew from her hand, its glass chimney shattering on the frozen ground. Kerosene spilled across the snow and ignited in a brief flash of orange flame before the wind snuffed it out. The pain came a heartbeat later, white-hot and overwhelming, a sensation like being branded with a red iron from the inside out. Her right hand reached back instinctively, fingers finding the wooden shaft protruding from her back. The fletching was done with crow feathers, black as sin, wrapped with sinew. The shaft was Osage orange wood, dense and springy, cut from a tree that grew in the river bottoms. She had seen arrows like this before, during the wars with the Cheyenne, before the tribes were driven north. "Don't pull it out." The words came from her own mouth, medical training overriding panic. She had been a nurse during the war, had seen too many men die from removed arrows. The barbed heads did more damage coming out than going in, tearing through muscle and vessel, opening wounds that bled out in minutes. On a ridge overlooking the grim tableau, 600 yards to the northwest, a lone horseman sat motionless. Curtis Morgan lowered the brass spyglass from his eye, his weathered face impassive save for the muscle working in his jaw. The scar that ran from his right temple to his jaw, a souvenir from Shiloh, stood out white against his wind-burned skin. He was 40 years old but looked 60. 2 decades of hard living as a hired gun had carved the youth from his features, leaving behind something cold and efficient. His hands, covered in deerskin gloves, held the Osage orange bow with casual familiarity. The bow was a war weapon, 70-pound pull weight, capable of driving an arrow through a man at 100 yards. 5 other riders sat their horses behind him, all dressed in heavy cowhide coats and wide-brimmed hats. They carried Winchester Model 1873 rifles in saddle scabbards, the brass receivers glinting dully in the stormlight. These were not cowboys or drifters. These were soldiers, or had been once and still moved with military precision. At their head sat Colonel Silas Brennan, 60 years old, ramrod straight in the saddle despite the howling wind. His hair had gone silver, swept back from a high forehead and tucked under a black Stetson. His mustache and goatee, meticulously groomed even in this wilderness, were white as fresh snow. He wore a long black duster that fell to his stirrups, lined with sheep's wool for warmth, but it was his eyes that marked him as dangerous. Blue as winter ice and just as cold, they registered Catherine's fall with no more emotion than if he had watched a tree branch snap in the wind. He pulled a Remington Model 1875 revolver from the holster at his hip, checked the cylinder with the unconscious habit of a man who had been shooting people for 40 years, and raised it skyward. The shot cracked across the valley, sharp as breaking bone. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, rolling back on itself until it seemed like a dozen guns had fired. Then darkness claimed the world. Segment 3. The Saloon and the Prophecy. 16 hours earlier, the world had been a different place. The Frozen Spur Saloon sat at the end of Whispering Pine's only street, a weathered building of rough-cut pine that had stood for 30 years. The walls were dark with age and smoke, the floorboards worn smooth by thousands of boots. A pot-bellied stove, fed with coal brought up from the railhead at Helena, glowed red in the center of the room. The heat it threw was fierce within 5 feet, non-existent beyond 10. The smell was layered like sediment in a riverbed. Rye whiskey and Bull Durham tobacco smoke formed the top notes. Below that, unwashed bodies, wet wool, and the acrid bite of coal smoke. Deeper still, old blood and older vomit ground into the floorboards until they were part of the wood itself. Cole Hartwell sat at a corner table, his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. Old habits from the war, habits that had kept him alive when better men died. At 58, his hair had gone salt and pepper, cut short in a military style that he had never quite abandoned. 3 days of stubble covered his arm, more white than black now. He was tall, 6 feet 1 inch, but had lost the bulk of his youth. 180 pounds on a frame that had once carried 200. His shoulders were still broad, but his back had developed the slight hunch of a man who had spent too many nights sleeping on hard ground. He wore a cowhide jacket, brown and worn soft at the elbows, over a wool shirt. Levi Strauss denims, the early kind with the copper rivets, covered legs that were slightly bowed from a lifetime in the saddle. His gun belt, good leather worked soft and oiled religiously, held a Colt single action army revolver. The Peacemaker, they called it, though Cole had never found much peace at the end of its 7.5-inch barrel. The gun was from 1873, one of the first production models, and Cole had carried it for 12 years. The walnut grips were worn smooth where his hand had gripped them thousands of times. The belt itself bore an inscription, tooled into the leather on the back, C8, 18th Infantry, 1863. The mark of a different life, a different man. Around his neck, wrapped twice and knotted loose, was a red wool scarf, hand-knitted, the stitches slightly uneven in the way that marked it as made with love rather than skill. It was the last thing Sarah had given him before Valley Forge, before everything went to hell. The wool had faded from crimson to rust, and the edges were starting to fray, but Cole had never been without it in 22 years. On the table in front of him sat a glass of whiskey, amber liquid that caught the lamplight. He drank it slowly, sipping rather than gulping, making it last. The bottle, Old Overholt Rye, sat next to his elbow. He had purchased it when he arrived 2 hours ago and had consumed perhaps 3 fingers. Not enough to cloud his judgment, just enough to take the edge off the cold that had seeped into his bones during the ride from Fort Benton. His right hand rested on the table, fingers drumming an unconscious rhythm. His left hand stayed in his lap, free and ready. Every 30 minutes, without seeming to think about it, he would reach down and touch the Colt, checking that it was still there, that the hammer rested on an empty chamber as it should. Her face was a map of wrinkles, each line a year of sun and wind and hard living. Her hair, white as fresh snow, hung in 2 long braids that reached past her waist. She wore a buckskin dress, worked soft and decorated with porcupine quills dyed in geometric patterns. Over this, she had wrapped a buffalo robe, the fur turned inward for warmth. In her hands, she carried a leather satchel, old and cracked, closed with a wooden toggle. The leather was buffalo hide, brain-tanned and smoked until it was soft as cloth. She moved through the saloon like smoke, and men shifted aside without seeming to realize they were doing it. She stopped at Cole's table. Up close, her eyes were black as obsidian, and they held a weight that made Cole's hand twitch toward his gun before he controlled the impulse. "You carry death with you," she said. Her voice was like wind through dried grass, soft but carrying. "Not your death, someone else's." Cole had seen enough of the frontier to know that some things could not be explained by logic. He had watched a Crow medicine man predict a blizzard 3 days before the first cloud appeared. He had seen a Blackfoot shaman heal a gut shot wound that should have killed a man in hours. So he did not dismiss her words, but neither did he accept them blindly. Death has been following me since '63, he said. Nothing new there. Ista studied him for a long moment, then lowered herself into the chair across from him. Her movements were careful but not frail. This was a woman who knew her body and its limitations, but had not yet reached them. Today you will meet a woman wounded by an arrow, she said, and the words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Your fate is bound to hers. Cole's hand, reaching for his whiskey glass, paused midway. I haven't seen an arrow wound since the Blackfoot troubles 5 years back. Ista reached into her satchel and withdrew a book. Not a book in the white man's sense, bound with thread and covered in leather, but a folded length of buffalo hide marked with pictographs. She opened it carefully, treating each fold like it was made of spider silk until she found the page she wanted. The drawing showed a man in a military coat. Beside him, rendered with surprising detail for such primitive materials, was a red scarf around the neck. Below the man's feet lay 47 small figures, stick people arranged in rows like crops in a field. Cole felt the blood drain from his face. Where did you get this? I was at Valley Forge that day, Ista said, her voice carrying no particular emotion. I saw what Colonel Brennan did. I drew what I saw. Her gnarled finger tapped the drawing of the scarf. Only one man survived, a man wearing a red scarf, just like the one around your neck. Cole's throat had gone dry. He reached for the whiskey and drained the glass in one swallow, welcoming the burn. When Sarah had knitted this scarf, she had made only one. He had watched her work on it through the winter of '62, her fingers flying with the needles even as Emma played at her feet. There should not be another like it in existence. My wife made this scarf, he said, hearing the roughness in his own voice. There's only one. Ista turned another page in her book. This drawing was more recent, the charcoal still fresh enough to smudge if touched carelessly. It showed a young woman standing in front of a brick building. Around her neck was a red scarf, rendered in the same careful detail. Beside the image were words in English, written in a hand that suggested recent education. Emma Kendricks, Montana Sentinel, Helena. The name hit Cole like a physical blow. He had not spoken his daughter's name aloud in 22 years, had barely let himself think it in the quiet moments before sleep. Emma, little Emma with her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin. Emma, who had been 5 years old when Brennan's firing squad cut her down along with her mother and 45 others. That's not possible, Cole said, but his voice lacked conviction. My daughter died at Valley Forge. Ista reached into her satchel again and withdrew an arrow. It was a beautiful piece of work, the kind of craftsmanship that took years to master. The shaft was Osage orange, perfectly straight and sanded smooth. The fletching was crow feathers, wrapped with sinew that had been soaked in pitch to waterproof it. The head was a three-bladed broadhead, forged from Damascus steel in the old way, with patterns that looked like flowing water frozen in metal. Curtis Morgan will use an arrow like this to wound a woman today, Ista said. She laid the arrow on the table between them like a challenge. When you find her, do not pull the arrow out. Push it forward, all the way through. Cole stared at the arrow. Curtis Morgan. He had known a Curtis Morgan in the war, a skilled archer who could hit a playing card at 100 yards. But Morgan had deserted in '62, disappeared into the territories. If he was still alive, if he was working for Brennan, then nothing good would come of it. Why are you telling me this? Cole asked. Ista closed her book and tucked it back into the satchel. Because the past is not finished with you, Cole Hartwell. What was buried at Valley Forge is about to come into the light, and the Eagle's daughter has been searching for you for 11 years. She stood, gathering the buffalo robe around her thin shoulders. Cole's hand shot out faster than a man his age should move, catching her wrist. She looked down at his hand, then up at his face, and showed no fear, only a deep sadness. How do you know about the eagle? The words came out harder than he intended, but Ista did not flinch. In the Cheyenne way, Cole's name translated roughly to eagle who sees far, a name given for his skill with a rifle. Only people who had known him during the Indian campaigns would know that name. Only people who had been there. I know many things, Ista said softly. I know that Colonel Brennan walks in daylight, thinking all witnesses are dead. I know that your daughter wears your wife's scarf. I know that before this loss ends, you will have to choose between revenge and justice. She pulled her wrist free gently. Take the arrow. When blood falls like rain, remember, push forward, not back. She turned and walked away, and men parted before her like water before the prow of a ship. The door opened and closed, and she was gone, leaving only the faint smell of sage smoke and the arrow on the table. Cole sat alone, staring at the arrow. His hands, scarred and calloused from 5 decades of hard work, trembled slightly as he reached for it. The wood was smooth under his fingers, warm despite the cold. He had handled thousands of arrows in his life, had pulled them from the bodies of friends and enemies alike. But this one felt different, weighted with purpose and prophecy. Outside, thunder rumbled across the mountains. The storm was coming. Cole wrapped the arrow in a piece of cloth and tucked it into his saddlebag. He left $2 silver on the table, more than enough to cover the whiskey and the wear on the chair. Then he stood, settled his hat on his head, and walked out into the gathering storm. His horse, an Appaloosa gelding named Ranger, waited at the hitching post. 12 years old, 15 hands high, with the characteristic spotted rump of his breed. The horse's breath came in white clouds, and ice had already begun forming on his muzzle. Cole pulled a rag from his coat and wiped the ice away gently before checking the cinch and stirrups. The saddle was a working cowboy's rig, nothing fancy but built to last. The Winchester Model 1873 rifle sat in a scabbard on the right side, fully loaded with 15 rounds of 44-40 ammunition. A bedroll and saddlebags completed the gear. Cole swung into the saddle with the ease of long practice, settling his weight and gathering the reins. Ranger shifted beneath him, eager to move, to generate warmth through motion. "Easy, boy," Cole murmured, patting the horse's neck. "Long ride ahead of us." He turned Ranger east, toward the cabin that Ista had mentioned, toward whatever fate waited for him in the snow. The town of Whispering Pines disappeared behind him as the storm closed in, swallowing the weak lights and leaving only the howling wind and the endless white. Segment 4, the journey through the blizzard. The temperature had dropped another 3 degrees in the hour since Cole left the saloon. 18 below zero now, cold enough that his breath froze in his mustache, forming tiny icicles that clicked together when he moved his jaw. Cold enough that the snow no longer fell in flakes, but in hard pellets that stung exposed skin like thrown gravel. Ranger's hooves crunched through snow that was already 6 inches deep and getting deeper by the minute. The horse's winter shoes, fitted with caulks to prevent slipping, bit into the ice underneath, providing purchase on terrain that would have been treacherous with smooth iron. Cole had learned that lesson the hard way 20 years ago, watching a good horse break its leg on black ice. Now he paid the extra dollar to have the blacksmith fit proper winter shoes every November, and he had never regretted the expense. The trail Cole followed was more memory than visible path. He had ridden these mountains for 15 years, knew every creek crossing and canyon pass. But the snow was erasing landmarks, turning the familiar into something alien and threatening. He navigated by the shape of distant peaks when he could see them through the blowing white, by the feel of the terrain under Ranger's hooves when he could not. Every 45 minutes he stopped to let Ranger rest. The horse could go all day at a walk, but pushing through deep snow and sub-zero temperatures was different work, harder on the muscles and lungs. During these stops, Cole would dismount and use his gloved hand to wipe the ice from Ranger's nostrils, checking that the airways stayed clear. A horse with frozen nasal passages would panic, and a panicking horse in a blizzard was a death sentence for both animal and rider. 2 hours into the ride, Cole found the first sign that Ista's prophecy might be more than the ravings of an old woman. Tracks in the snow, partially filled but still visible. 6 horses, moving east at a steady pace. The tracks were maybe 4 hours old, made before the worst of the storm hit. 6 riders suggested a military formation, not cowboys or prospectors. Cole dismounted and knelt beside the tracks, brushing away the fresh snow to see the impressions more clearly. The shoes were regulation cavalry issue, the pattern unmistakable to anyone who had spent time in the Army. But there had been no cavalry stationed in this part of Montana for 3 years, not since the last of the Cheyenne surrendered and moved north to the reservation. A glint of brass caught his eye. He reached down and picked up a spent cartridge case, still bright despite lying in the snow. Winchester 44-40, the same caliber as the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Someone had fired a shot here, recently enough that the brass had not had time to tarnish. Cole stood, the cartridge case held between thumb and forefinger. He turned slowly, reading the story the snow told him. The 6 riders had stopped here. One had dismounted, moving toward the tree line to the north. That rider had fired one shot, then returned to his horse. The group had then continued east at a faster pace. No longer the steady march of before, but the urgent movement of men with a destination. Blood on the snow, just a few drops, already half buried. Someone or something had been wounded here. Wounded and moved on. Cole's jaw tightened. Whatever was happening, it had already turned violent. He remounted and urged Ranger forward, following the tracks. The horse seemed to sense his urgency and picked up the pace slightly, still careful but moving faster than before. The tracks led him exactly where he expected, exactly where he feared. Toward the Wade cabin, the home of Daniel Wade, the journalist who had been asking too many questions about Valley Forge, about weapons sales, about things that powerful men wanted to stay buried. The cabin came into view an hour before sunset, though sunset was a relative term in a blizzard. The sky simply grew darker, the white of the snow fading to gray. The cabin was a simple structure, 20 feet by 24 feet, built of pine logs chinked with mud and moss. A stone chimney rose from one end, smoke still rising from it despite the wind trying to blow it horizontal. But the windows were broken. Glass glittered in the snow around the foundation, and the front door hung crooked on its hinges, the top hinge torn completely free of the frame. The snow on the porch was trampled and stained with something dark that could only be blood. Cole drew the Winchester from its scabbard and worked the lever action, chambering around. The mechanical sound was sharp in the cold air, the kind of sound that carried meaning to anyone who had ever been in a fight. He dismounted, keeping Ranger between himself and the cabin, using the horse as mobile cover while he assessed the situation. No movement from the windows, no sound except the wind. The tracks showed that the 6 riders had been here, had entered the cabin, had left in a hurry. But there were other tracks too, smaller boot prints, a woman's size moving from the cabin toward the bridge to the east. These tracks were more recent, made after the riders left, and they were spaced far apart. Someone running or trying to run through deep snow. Cole tied Ranger to a pine tree, sheltered slightly from the wind, and approached the cabin on foot. Every nerve was alive, every sense heightened. His finger rested along the Winchester's trigger guard, ready but not committed. The snow crunched under his boots despite his efforts to move quietly. In this cold, there was no such thing as a silent approach. The inside of the cabin was chaos. Furniture overturned, papers scattered across the floor, blood on the wall near the fireplace. But what caught Cole's attention was the figure crouched beside the hearth, a woman kneeling with her back to him, her left arm hanging useless at her side. The arrow protruded from her shoulder blade at exactly the angle Ista had described, the black fletching unmistakable even in the dim light. The broadhead had punched through and emerged below her collarbone, just as the old woman had said it would. Blood had soaked through the blue wool of her dress, turning it purple-black. "Ma'am," Cole said softly, not wanting to startle her. Catherine Wade's head snapped around, her eyes wide with fear and pain. She was younger than Cole had expected, perhaps 35, with features that would have been handsome in better circumstances. Her brown hair had come loose from its pins and hung in tangles around her face. Her skin was pale, shock starting to set in, but her eyes were still sharp, still fighting. "Don't touch it," she said, her voice hoarse but firm. "Don't pull the arrow out. I'll bleed to death." Cole lowered the Winchester slightly, a gesture of peace. "I wasn't planning to, ma'am. I know about barbed arrows." He moved closer, slowly, giving her time to adjust to his presence. Up close, he could see the professional quality of the shot. The arrow had been placed with precision, meant to wound and incapacitate, not to kill quickly. Whoever had shot this woman had wanted her to suffer, to be alive when they came back. "You a doctor?" Catherine asked, her teeth chattering despite the heat from the fireplace. "Cowboy," Cole said, "but I've pulled enough arrows to know the right way and the wrong way." He knelt beside her, setting the Winchester down within easy reach. "We need to push it through, not pull it back. That's going to hurt considerable." Catherine managed a weak smile. "I was a nurse in the war. I know what it's going to feel like." Her good hand reached out and gripped his forearm with surprising strength. "But first you need to know what happened here." Who did this? Colonel Silas Brennan, Cole said, and watched her eyes widen in surprise. I know him. We have history. Then you know what he's capable of, Catherine said. She gestured weakly toward the scattered papers with her good hand. My husband Daniel, he's been investigating Brennan for 6 months. Found proof that the colonel has been poisoning water wells, creating conflicts between settlers and tribes so he can sell weapons to both sides. Cole felt something cold settle in his stomach, colder than the blizzard outside. 22 years ago, Brennan had murdered 47 people to cover up his weapons dealing. Now he was doing it again, on a larger scale with more sophisticated methods. Some men never changed. They just found new ways to pursue old sins. Where's your husband now? Cole asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. They took him, Catherine said, and tears began to cut tracks through the dirt on her face. To the Creek Run Bridge. They're going to hang him upside down over the water. Let him drown slowly while the creek rises from the snowmelt. Cole knew the bridge, a 40-foot span of timber and iron built to carry freight wagons during the mining boom 20 years ago. The creek below ran fast and cold, fed by springs that never froze completely, even in the deepest winter. In a storm like this, with snow melting as fast as it fell, the water level would rise an inch a minute, maybe faster. He looked at Catherine or buried the arrow through her shoulder at the blood loss and the shock setting in. He looked at the papers scattered across the floor, evidence that could bring down a man who should have been brought down 22 years ago. He thought about Emma, about the daughter he thought was dead, who might be alive in Helena, wearing her mother's scarf, and he made a choice that would echo through the rest of his life. We're going to fix this arrow situation first, he said, his voice calm and steady despite the violence he was about to commit. Then we're going to save your husband. Then we're going to make Brennan pay for every life he's taken. He met her eyes, let her see the iron will that had kept him alive through Valley Forge and 22 years of searching. But I'm going to need you to trust me and to be strong for about 2 more minutes. Can you do that? Catherine Wade, nurse and fighter, wife and survivor, looked into the eyes of this strange cowboy who had appeared in her darkest hour like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray. She saw something there, something hard and unbreakable, something that had been forged in fires she could only imagine. Yes, she said simply. Cole nodded once. He went to the kitchen, found clean water in a bucket and clean cloth in a drawer. He brought these back to where Catherine knelt, along with a bottle of whiskey he found in the cupboard. He poured water over his hands, cleaning them as best he could, then soaked a cloth in the whiskey. This is going to burn, he said, pressing the whiskey-soaked cloth to both sides of the wound, cleaning away the blood and dirt. Catherine hissed through her teeth, but did not cry out. The arrow went clean through, missed the big vessels. You were lucky. Lucky, Catherine repeated, with a bitter laugh. Cole drew his knife, a Bowie with a 9-inch blade that he kept sharp enough to shave with. He heated the blade in the fire for 30 seconds, a field-expedient form of sterilization that probably did not do much but made him feel better. Then he gripped the arrow shaft with his left hand, bracing it steady. Bite down on this, he said, offering her a piece of leather from his belt. She took it between her teeth. On 3. 1. He pushed, hard and fast, driving the arrow forward before the count reached 2. The broadhead punched through the remaining tissue and emerged fully, 3 inches of steel gleaming red in the firelight. Catherine's scream was muffled by the leather, her body going rigid with pain. But she did not pass out, did not let go. Cole worked fast. He used the knife to cut the arrow shaft on both sides of the wound, removing the head and the fletching, leaving only a smooth shaft passing through her shoulder. Then, in one smooth motion, he pulled the shaft out from the front. Blood welled from both wounds, but not the arterial spray that would have meant death. He packed both holes with clean cloth soaked in whiskey, then wrapped her shoulder and chest with strips torn from a sheet he found in the bedroom. The bandaging was crude but effective, tight enough to slow the bleeding without cutting off circulation. The whole process took less than 3 minutes. When it was done, Catherine sagged against the wall, her face gray and slick with sweat despite the cold. But she was alive, and barring infection, she would stay that way. Rest here, Cole said, covering her with a blanket. I'm going to get your husband. They'll kill you, Catherine said weakly. Brennan has 6 men, all professional gunfighters. Cole stood, picked up the Winchester, and checked the loads mechanically. 15 rounds in the magazine, one in the chamber. He had his Colt with 6 rounds and 30 spare cartridges in his gun belt. Against 6 men, the numbers were not good, but Cole had never let bad numbers stop him before. "Ma'am," he said, settling his hat on his head, "Brennan killed my wife and daughter 22 years ago at Valley Forge. Or I thought he killed my daughter. Now I'm learning maybe she survived." He looked down at Catherine, let her see the full weight of 22 years of grief and rage that he carried. "I've been waiting for this moment since 1863. 6 men, or 60, Brennan's reckoning has come due." He walked to the door, then paused and turned back. "The woman who sent me here, she said your husband has been working with my daughter, Emma McKendricks. Is that true?" Catherine nodded weakly. "She's a reporter for the Sentinel in Helena. She and Daniel have been investigating Valley Forge together for 6 months. She's been searching for her father for 11 years. The words hit Cole like a physical blow. 11 years. Emma had been searching for him for 11 years while he drifted from town to town, running from his ghosts instead of facing them. All that wasted time, all those missed years. "If I don't make it back," Cole said, his voice thick with emotion he could not quite control, "you tell Emma that her father never stopped thinking about her, never stopped loving her. You tell her that." Then he was gone, out into the storm, leaving Catherine alone with the fire and the scattered evidence of Brennan's crimes. She closed her eyes and prayed for her husband, for this strange cowboy, for the daughter who had spent 11 years searching for a father who did not know she was alive. Outside, Cole swung into the saddle and turned Ranger toward the bridge. The storm had reached its full fury now, wind howling through the canyon with the voice of 1,000 dead souls. The snow was so thick he could barely see Ranger's ears, had to trust the horse to find the path. But Cole was not thinking about the storm. He was thinking about a little girl with her mother's eyes, about a red scarf knitted with love, about 22 years of believing she was dead. He was thinking about the chance, slim as a razor's edge, that he might get back something he thought was lost forever. And he was thinking about Silas Brennan, about debts owed and accounts long overdue. The colonel had taken everything from Cole once before. He would not do it again. The bridge was a dark shape in the swirling white, and from its center came the sound of a man drowning by inches. Cole's hand tightened on the Winchester. The reckoning had begun. The Creek Run Bridge materialized from the snow like a ghost, its outline softened by the accumulating ice that covered every surface. Cole stopped Ranger 200 yards out, using a stand of pines for cover, while he studied the scene through the swirling white. The bridge itself was a testament to the ambition of men who had once believed these mountains would yield enough gold to make them all rich. 40 feet of timber and iron-spanning water that ran black and fast, even in the coldest winters. The railings were thick beams, notched and pegged together with the kind of craftsmanship that had died out with the old builders. Icicles hung from every joint and seam, some as thick as fence posts, creating a cage of frozen water that glittered when lightning split the sky. At the center of that cage, Daniel Wade hung like a slaughtered animal. The rope binding him was professional work, the kind of knot that would not slip or loosen no matter how much the victim struggled. His wrists were lashed behind his back tight enough that his fingers had gone purple. His face, inverted and engorged with blood, was a mask of purple and red, veins standing out like tributaries on a map of suffering. The water had risen past his shoulders, was lapping at his jaw now. Each small wave sent icy fingers across his skin, and his lips had gone blue with cold. His breath came in desperate gasps, each one shorter than the last, each one a countdown to the moment when the water would claim him completely. What caught Cole's attention was what he did not see. No guards, no riders keeping watch. The bridge and its dying burden sat alone in the storm, apparently abandoned. But Cole had not survived 2 decades on the frontier by trusting appearances. He dismounted and tied Ranger to a pine branch, then pulled the brass spyglass from his saddlebag. The glass was old, carried by his father during the Mexican War, and the lens had a slight cloudiness that came with age, but it still magnified well enough to matter. Sweeping the glass slowly across the landscape around the bridge, Cole found what he was looking for. 3 men, positioned in a triangle around the crossing. The first was buried in a snowdrift to the left of the bridge, only the top of his hat visible and the barrel of his Winchester poking through like a snake's tongue. The second was in a pine tree to the right, 20 feet up, nestled in the branches with a clear line of fire to anyone approaching the bridge. The third was in a thicket of brush to the east, positioned to shoot anyone who made it past the first two. An ambush. A trap baited with a drowning man, waiting for someone foolish enough or brave enough to attempt a rescue. The military precision of it marked it as Brennan's work. The colonel had always been thorough, had always thought 3 moves ahead. It was what had made him so effective during the war and so dangerous afterward. Cole lowered the spyglass and considered his options. A direct approach was suicide. Even with the element of surprise, even with his skill with a rifle, 3-to-1 odds in prepared positions were not odds a sane man would take. But the water was rising, and Daniel Wade had perhaps 10 minutes before he drowned. There was no time for clever tactics, no time for anything but speed and violence. He checked the Winchester, 15 rounds. He pulled the Colt and spun the cylinder, checking each chamber. 6 rounds, 21 total against 3 men. The numbers were better than they seemed. Most gunfights were decided in the first 3 seconds, the first 3 shots. After that, it was chaos, fear, and luck in roughly equal measure. Cole put the spyglass away and pulled the red scarf tighter around his neck. Sarah had knitted it to keep him warm, to keep him safe. For 22 years it had done both. He touched it once, a gesture that was half prayer and half promise. Then he moved. The approach to the tree line was a belly crawl through snow that soaked through his clothes in seconds. The cold was immediate and brutal, leaching heat from his body faster than he could generate it. But the snow also provided concealment, and Cole used it, moving in the small dips and depressions that the wind had carved, staying below the sight line of the riflemen in the pine tree. It took him 15 minutes to cover 100 yards. His clothes were frozen stiff now, crackling when he moved. His fingers were going numb despite the gloves, and he had to keep flexing them to maintain feeling. But he was behind the snowdrift now, behind the first ambusher, and the man had not seen him coming. The rifleman was perhaps 40 years old, dressed in a heavy coat with the collar turned up against the wind. His hat was pulled low, and his attention was fixed on the bridge, watching for anyone approaching from the west. The Winchester in his hands was new, brass gleaming despite the storm. This was not a man who neglected his weapons. Cole drew the Bowie knife with his left hand. The blade was cold enough to stick to his glove, and he had to be careful pulling it free. He transferred the knife to his right hand, feeling the familiar weight, the perfect balance. Then he moved. The rifleman's first indication that something was wrong was the hand that clamped over his mouth, cutting off any cry for help. The second was the knife that entered below his ribs, angled upward toward the heart. The blade was sharp enough to slide between ribs without catching, and Cole knew from long experience exactly where to put it. The man jerked once, tried to twist away, but Cole held him firm. 30 seconds passed, counted out by the beating of Cole's own heart, and then the rifleman went limp. Cole lowered him into the snow drift carefully, making no sound, leaving no disturbance that would be visible from a distance. He took the dead man's Winchester and ammunition, adding 15 more rounds to his arsenal. 1 down, 2 to go, and Daniel Wade's nose was now underwater. Cole moved to the pine tree, using the trunk for cover while he assessed the second ambusher. The man was wedged into a fork 20 feet up, his legs wrapped around the branch for stability, his rifle resting in a notch that gave him a perfect field of fire over to the bridge. From this angle, Cole could see the soles of his boots, worn leather with a hole starting in the left heel. A direct shot was possible but not certain. The angle was wrong, and tree branches obscured the target. Cole could aim for the boots, try to wound the man and bring him down, but a wounded man would scream and alert the third ambusher. No, this needed to be clean and quiet, or as quiet as death ever was. Cole found a position 50 yards back, where a fallen log provided a rest for the rifle. He sat in the snow, braced the Winchester against the log, and sighted carefully. The iron sights were simple, just a blade front and a notch rear, but Cole had been shooting iron sights since he was 12 years old. He knew how to account for wind, for distance, for the slight drop a bullet experienced over 80 yards. The rifleman's head was visible in profile, a small target made smaller by the hat and the scarf wrapped around his face. But there was a gap. perhaps 3 inches of exposed skin between hat brim and scarf, and that was all Cole needed. He breathed out slowly, letting his heart rate settle. The cold helped with that, slowing everything down, making the world sharp and clear. He placed the front sight in the center of that gap, held it there while he drew another breath, then squeezed the trigger on the exhale. The Winchester cracked, sharp in the cold air. The rifleman's head snapped back and he fell from the tree, dropping 20 feet to land in the snow with a heavy thump. Cole was already moving, working the lever action to chamber another round, shifting his aim to where the third ambusher should be. But the thicket was empty. The third man had moved, using the sound of the shot to relocate. Smart. Brennan hired smart men, men who knew their trade. Gunfire erupted from a new position, 30 yards to the south. 5 shots in rapid succession, all aimed at where Cole had been when he fired. Bullets clipped branches and threw up gouts of snow. But Cole was already moving, rolling to his left and coming up behind a boulder. The return fire was instinctive. 3 rounds pumped from the Winchester without conscious thought, muscle memory from 1,000 range sessions and a dozen gunfights. Cole did not know if he hit anything, was not even sure he had seen a target, but the incoming fire stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the wind and the sound of Daniel Wade choking on creek water. The man's struggles were weakening now, his body giving up the fight against cold and drowning. Perhaps 2 minutes left, maybe less. Cole made a decision. He stood up from behind the boulder. Bowler, Winchester at his shoulder, and ran toward the bridge. Not directly, but at an angle that would bring him around behind where he thought the third ambusher was hiding. His boots pounded through the snow, each step an explosion of white. He was making himself a target, drawing fire, gambling that he could move faster than the other man could aim. More shots, these better aimed. A bullet passed close enough to his left ear that he heard it crack the air. Another hit the ground between his feet, throwing up snow and frozen dirt. But then Cole was at the thicket, going through it rather than around it, branches tearing at his face and hands. The third ambusher was there, a young man with red hair and a beard to match. He was trying to work the lever on his Winchester, but the mechanism had frozen, the action stiff with ice. His eyes went wide when he saw Cole emerge from the brush, and he dropped the rifle and reached for the revolver at his hip. Cole shot him 3 times, chest, neck. The man went down hard, blood staining the snow and spreading pools of crimson that steamed in the cold air. 3 down, 0 time remaining. Cole ran to the bridge, his boots slipping on ice that was slick as glass. He went to his knees beside where Daniel hung, his knife already out. The rope was thick and the blade was not a saw, but Cole put his back into it, cutting with short, powerful strokes that made his shoulders burn. The rope parted with a sound like a bowstring snapping. Daniel fell, and Cole caught him, pulling him up out of the water that was now chest deep on the bridge deck. The journalist's lips were blue, his skin white as the snow around them. Ice had formed in his hair and beard. His eyes were open but unseeing. Consciousness fled in the face of hypothermia and near drowning. Cole rolled him onto his stomach and pounded on his back, trying to force the water from his lungs. Once, twice, 3 times, each blow hard enough to crack ribs if Cole was not careful. Daniel convulsed and water poured from his mouth and nose. More water than seemed possible from a human body. Then he drew a ragged breath, coughed, drew another. "Catherine," he managed, the word barely audible. "My wife." "She's alive," Cole said, already working to cut the ropes binding Daniel's wrists. "Shot with an arrow, but I patched her up. She'll live." Daniel's eyes focused on Cole's face, seeing him clearly for the first time. "Who are you?" "Cole Hartwell," Cole said. 18th Infantry, Union Army, only survivor of the Valley Forge massacre. He got the last rope cut and began rubbing Daniel's hands, trying to restore circulation. "I understand you've been investigating that particular incident." Recognition dawned in Daniel's eyes, followed by shock that overcame even the cold. "You're Emma's father. She's been searching for you for 11 years. The words hit Cole like a fist to the chest. He had to stop working on Daniel's hands, had to take a moment to process what he had just heard. Emma, alive, searching for him for 11 years. "She thinks I'm dead," Cole said, his voice rough with emotion he could not quite control. "She knows you're not," Daniel replied, teeth chattering violently. Found evidence that you survived Valley Forge. Body count didn't match the casualty list. She's been tracking you across 3 territories. Cole helped Daniel sit up, supporting him against the bridge railing. The journalist was shaking so hard, his teeth were clicking together, but he was alive and coherent. That was more than Cole had hoped for 2 minutes ago. "Where is she?" Cole asked. "Where's Emma?" "Helena," Daniel said, "working for my newspaper, the Montana Sentinel. We've been collaborating on the Valley Forge investigation. She has documents, photographs, evidence that will hang Brennan and everyone who helped him." The sound of horses approaching cut through the storm. Cole's head snapped around, and he saw them coming from the east. 6 riders, moving at a gallop despite the treacherous footing. At their head rode Colonel Silas Brennan, his black duster streaming behind him like the wings of death itself. "Can you ride?" Cole asked urgently. Daniel tried to stand and his legs folded under him. "No, hypothermia, can't feel my legs." Cole made a rapid calculation. 6 men coming. His Winchester held 12 rounds now after the firefight. His Colt had 6, 18 total against 6 opponents. The math was possible, but the situation was not. Not with Daniel unable to move, not with the bridge offering no cover, not with the storm limiting visibility to 50 yards. Retreat was the only option. Cole got his shoulder under Daniel's arm and half carried, half dragged him toward Ranger. The horse had stayed where Cole tied him, patient despite the gunfire and chaos. Good horse. Worth every dollar Cole had paid for him 5 years ago. Getting Daniel into the saddle was a struggle. The journalist kept losing consciousness, his body shutting down to conserve heat. But Cole managed it, tying Daniel's hands to the saddle horn to keep him from falling, wrapping him in the bedroll for whatever warmth it might provide. The riders were closer now, close enough that Cole could make out individual faces. Brennan in the lead, his face expressionless as carved stone. Behind him, Curtis Morgan with his distinctive scar, and 3 others Cole did not recognize. Only 5 riders. One was missing. Cole's eyes swept the landscape and found him, a lone horseman breaking off from the group, circling around to cut off retreat to the north. Tactical thinking. Brennan had not forgotten how to fight in the 22 years since the war ended. Cole swung into the saddle behind Daniel, gathered the reins, and turned to Ranger south. Not toward Catherine in the cabin, which is what Brennan would expect, but away from it, toward the maze of canyons and ridges that Cole knew better than any map. Terrain where numbers mattered less than knowledge, where 6 men could be defeated by one if that one knew where to lead them. Ranger lunged forward, powerful hindquarters driving through the snow. The horse had been bred for mountain work, had the heart and lungings for high altitude, and now he showed why Cole had chosen him. They hit full gallop in 3 strides, snow flying from hooves that pounded the frozen ground like hammers. Behind them, Brennan shouted orders, and the pursuit began. Segment 6, The Chase and the Confrontation. The canyon country south of Creek Run was a labyrinth of stone and ice, carved over millennia by water that had long since found other paths. Walls of granite rose 100 feet on either side, so close in places that a man could touch both sides by spreading his arms. The floor was treacherous with hidden ice and stones that could break a horse's leg if the rider was not careful. Cole knew these canyons, had used them 15 years ago during the last Blackfoot uprising, had led a war party on a 3-day chase through passages so narrow the warriors had to dismount and lead their horses. He had lost them in here, doubled back and ambushed them at Dead Man's Gulch, killed 6 braves with as many shots from positions they never saw. He was counting on that knowledge now, counting on 20 years of riding these mountains to give him an edge against men who might be better armed, better mounted, but who did not know the land the way he did. Ranger's hooves found purchase on stone that was slick with ice, the winter shoes biting in where smooth iron would have slipped. Behind them, Cole heard the clatter of pursuit, the shouted curses as horses balked at the narrow passages. Good. Let them slow down. Let them think twice about following into terrain that could kill them as easily as any bullet. Daniel was unconscious again, slumped forward against the saddle horn. His breathing was shallow but steady. Hypothermia was still a danger, would be a danger until they got him somewhere warm and dry, but he was not dead yet. That was something. The canyon forked ahead, 3 passages splitting off in different directions. Cole took the middle one without slowing, leaning low over Ranger's neck as the walls closed in. This passage was barely wide enough for a horse and rider, a crack in the mountain that went back 200 yards before opening into a small basin. Halfway through, Cole reined Ranger to a halt. The horse's breath came in great plumes of white steam, sides heaving. Cole dismounted carefully, keeping Daniel balanced in the saddle, and led the horse into a small alcove where the stone had eroded to create a pocket barely big enough for them. From his saddlebag, he pulled the Winchester and checked the loads. 12 rounds, not enough for a sustained fight, but enough if he was careful. He positioned himself at the mouth of the alcove, where he could see down the length of the passage without being easily seen himself. The wait was not long. 2 riders entered the passage, moving cautiously now, aware that narrow spaces meant ambush. Cole recognized Curtis Morgan in the lead, the archer who had shot Catherine. Behind him rode a man Cole did not know, heavy-set and bearded, with a shotgun resting across his saddle bow. Cole let them come. 20 yards. 15. 10. When they were close enough that he could see the ice in Morgan's beard, he stepped out from the alcove with the Winchester already at his shoulder. "Hello, Curtis," Cole said. Morgan's hand flashed to his revolver, but Cole's finger was already tightening on the trigger. The Winchester cracked, and Morgan went backward off his horse, a neat hole in his chest pumping blood that looked black in the dim light of the canyon. The bearded man tried to bring the shotgun around, but Ranger, trained for war in the cavalry campaigns, lashed out with his hooves. One caught the man's horse in the shoulder, sending it sideways into the canyon wall. The rider fought for control, and in that moment of distraction, Cole shot him twice. The man fell from the saddle and did not move. 2 down, 4 to go. Cole caught Morgan's horse before it could bolt, a good-looking buckskin with cavalry brands on its hindquarters. He transferred Daniel to this fresh mount, working quickly but carefully. From the canyon mouth behind them came shouts, the sound of more riders approaching. No time to rest. Cole led both horses deeper into the passage, toward the basin he knew waited at the far end. The stone walls were so close now that his stirrups scraped against them, throwing sparks when iron met granite. Then the passage opened up, and they were in the basin. It was a natural amphitheater, roughly circular, perhaps 50 yards across. The walls were sheer cliffs on 3 sides, unclimbable without rope and gear. The only way in or out was the passage Cole had just used, a dead end. But Cole knew something Brennan did not. Along the south wall, hidden behind a fall of boulders, was a game trail used by mountain goats. It was steep, barely wide enough for a horse, but it led up and over the ridge to the valley beyond. Cole had used it before when the Blackfoot were hunting him, had led his horse up terrain that seemed impossible. He was counting on it being impossible enough that Brennan would not think to look for it. Cole positioned the horses behind the boulder fall and climbed up to a ledge that gave him a commanding view of the passage entrance. From here he could see anyone who entered, and they could not see him. The Winchester felt solid in his hands, the wood warm from being inside his coat. He had 10 rounds left. It would have to be enough. The first rider to enter the basin was cautious, walking his horse slowly, eyes scanning for danger. Cole did not recognize him. He shot him carefully, taking time to aim despite the cold that made his fingers stiff. The man fell without a sound, and his horse bolted back the way it had come. 3 down, 3 to go. But the remaining riders did not enter. Cole heard Brennan's voice, sharp and commanding, giving orders. Smart. The colonel had not survived 40 years of warfare by being reckless. He would wait, would try to starve Cole out or find another way around. Time passed. The storm began to ease slightly, the wind dropping from a howl to a steady blow. The sun, invisible behind the clouds, began its descent toward the western horizon. In another hour it would be full dark, and in the dark Cole could slip away with Daniel and make it back to the cabin. But Brennan was not patient enough to wait for dark. "Hartwell!" The voice echoed through the basin, amplified by the stone walls. "I know you're in there. I know you can hear me." Cole said nothing, conserving his strength, conserving ammunition. "You've killed 3 of my men," Brennan continued. "Impressive work for a man your age. But you're trapped in there with a pining man and nowhere to go. Surrender now and I'll make it quick. Keep fighting and I'll make Daniel Wade watch while I skin you alive." Cole's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Or perhaps, Brennan said, his voice taking on a contemplative tone, I should tell you about your daughter, Emma. Pretty girl. She has your eyes, you know. I've been watching her and Helena, waiting for the right moment to deal with her and her crusading journalism. The words hit Cole like bullets. His hands tightened on the Winchester until the wood creaked. She doesn't know you're alive, does she? Brennan laughed, the sound cold and cruel. She's been searching for a ghost, writing articles about Valley Forge, trying to expose crimes that happened before she was old enough to remember them. It's almost touching, really, daughter searching for father, father wandering the territories like a lost soul. Cole closed his eyes, forced himself to breathe slowly. This was bait, meant to make him angry, meant to make him careless. Brennan had always been good at psychological warfare, at finding the weak points in a man's armor and probing them. Here's what's going to happen, Hartwell, Brennan said. You're going to come out of there with your hands up. You're going to give me Daniel Wade and all his documents about Valley Forge and the water poisoning. And in exchange, I'll let you live long enough to see Emma one more time before I kill you both. Behind Cole, Daniel stirred. The journalist's eyes fluttered open, consciousness returning slowly. Don't, he managed, his voice barely a whisper. Don't give him anything. Cole glanced back at him. Wasn't planning on it. Emma, Daniel said. She has copies of everything, safe in Helena. Even if he gets the documents from me, she can still publish. Cole nodded. That changed things. If the evidence was safe, if Emma could still expose Brennan, even if Daniel and Cole died here, then the equation was different. Then this was about survival, not about protecting secrets. There's a way out, Cole said quietly, gesturing toward the hidden trail. Behind those boulders. Can you ride if I tie you in the saddle? Daniel tried to move his legs and grimaced. Maybe, if we go slow. We're not going slow, Cole said. We're going to move fast and trust the horses to keep their feet. It's that, or stay here and die. A gunshot cracked from the passage entrance. The bullet ricocheted off the cliff face above Cole's head, throwing chips of stone. More shots followed, a sustained barrage meant to keep Cole pinned while someone tried to maneuver around to the sides. But there were no sides. The walls were sheer. The only way up was the goat trail, and Brennan did not know about it. Cole fired twice, aiming at muzzle flashes in the dim light of the passage. He heard a scream, high and sharp, then silence. 4 down, maybe. Or maybe just wounded. Hard to tell. He scrambled down from the ledge and untied Daniel from the buckskin saddle. The journalist was shivering uncontrollably now, shock and hypothermia combining to shut his body down, bit by bit. Getting him on Ranger and securely tied took precious minutes. Minutes during which more shots rang out, bullets whining off stone. Cole led both horses to the boulder fall and found the trail. It was worse than he remembered, steeper and narrower. The first 20 feet were the hardest, a nearly vertical scramble where the horses had to lunge upward, hooves scrabbling for purchase on ice-covered rock. Ranger went first, sure-footed despite his burden, and the buckskin followed. Behind them, Cole heard Brennan shout in frustration. The colonel had figured out what was happening, but too late to stop it. A bullet struck the cliff, face inches from Cole's head, and he felt the sting of stone fragments cutting his cheek. But then they were over the lip of the ridge and onto the easier ground beyond, and the basin fell away below them. The descent on the far side was faster, the trail wider and less steep. Cole pushed the horses hard, trusting them to find their footing in the failing light. By the time they reached the valley floor, full darkness had fallen and the storm had renewed its fury. Snow fell so thick that Cole could barely see Ranger's ears in front of him. But they were alive. Both of them. Against odds that should have killed them, they were alive. Cole turned the horses west, toward the cabin where Catherine waited, towards shelter and warmth and the chance to regroup. Behind them, somewhere in the darkness, Brennan and his remaining men would be searching. But in this storm, in this darkness, finding 2 men in the vastness of Montana wilderness would be next to impossible. For tonight, they were safe. Segment 7, Revelations and Plans. The cabin appeared through the snow like a mirage, its windows glowing with firelight that seemed impossibly warm and welcoming after hours in the cold. Cole had pushed the horses hard for the last hour, driven by the knowledge that Daniel was fading fast and needed warmth more than he needed anything else. Catherine met them at the door, her face pale but determined. The bandages Cole had applied were still in place, and though blood had seeped through the cloth, the flow had stopped. She moved carefully, favoring her injured shoulder, but she moved. Together, they got Daniel inside and stripped off his frozen clothes. Catherine had heated water and blankets by the fire, and they worked in practiced silence to warm him, rubbing his extremities to restore circulation, wrapping him in layers of wool and fur. "He'll live," Catherine said finally, sitting back on her heels. Frostbite on his fingers and toes, but nothing too severe. Another hour in that water, and it would be a different story. Cole nodded, too exhausted to speak. He had been running on adrenaline and willpower for 6 hours, and now that the immediate danger had passed, the crash was setting in. He sat heavily in a chair by the fire and let the warmth seep into his bones. "You saved his life," Catherine said, looking at Cole with eyes that held both gratitude and question. "Why, you don't know us." "I know Brennan," Cole said. "That's enough." She studied him for a long moment. "Daniel said you're Emma's father, the girl who's been helping us investigate Valley Forge." The name still hit Cole like a punch. Emma, his daughter, alive after 22 years of believing her dead. He pulled the red scarf from around his neck and held it, the wool soft in his rough hands. "Sarah knitted this," he said quietly. "My wife, Emma's mother, winter of '62, right before I shipped out to Pennsylvania. Sarah said it would keep me safe." His voice caught. She was wrong. Didn't keep her safe. Didn't keep Emma safe. "Emma's alive because someone saved her," Catherine said gently. "Someone pulled her from that massacre and kept her hidden. Whoever that was, they did what Sarah would have wanted." Cole looked up sharply. "You know who saved her?" Catherine moved to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a leather satchel. Inside were papers, documents, photographs. She spread them on the table, and Cole saw his past laid out in black and white. Images of Valley Forge, the execution line, bodies in the snow, and one photograph that made his heart stop. A little girl, perhaps 5 years old, wrapped in a blanket. Beside her stood a man in a clerical collar, his hand on her shoulder. Behind them, barely visible, was Cole's cabin from before the war. "Jonathan Kendricks," Catherine said. "Army chaplain. He was at Valley Forge that day, heard the gunshots, arrived too late to stop the Morisqueur, but in time to find survivors." "Emma," Cole whispered, his finger touching the photograph gently, as if the paper itself was precious. "And you," Catherine added. "Kendricks found you shot and left for dead. He got you both out, took you to a safe house, treated your wounds. But you were unconscious for 3 days, and when you woke, Kendricks told you Emma had died." Cole's head snapped up. He lied? Why would he lie? Daniel, conscious now and wrapped in blankets by the fire, spoke for the first time. His voice was weak but steady. "Protection. Brennan was hunting survivors. Kendricks thought if you believed Emma was dead, you wouldn't search for her, wouldn't lead Brennan to her." The logic was sound, Cole could see that. But the cost. 22 years of grief. 22 years of his daughter growing up without him. 22 years of believing he had failed to protect his family. "Where is he now?" Cole asked, his voice hard. "Kendricks, I want to talk to him." "Dead," Daniel said. 2 weeks ago, heart attack, supposedly. But we think Brennan had him poisoned once he learned that Kendricks knew the truth about Valley Forge." Cole felt something cold settle in his chest. Another debt to lay at Brennan's feet. Another name on the list of people the colonel had destroyed. "Emma doesn't know any of this," Catherine said. "Kendricks raised her as his niece, never told her who her real father was until she was 16. By then you had disappeared into the territories. She's been searching for you ever since." 11 years, Cole said. The number felt impossibly large. "She's been looking for me for 11 years, and I didn't even know she was alive." "She knows now," Daniel said. "We sent word to Helena before Brennan came, told her we had found a survivor from Valley Forge who might be her father. She'll be coming here as soon as she gets the message." Cole stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "No, she can't come here. Brennan knows about her, he said so himself. If she comes here, she'll ride straight into a trap." "Then we go to her," Catherine said. "Helena is 4 days' ride from here in good weather. Weather in this storm, maybe 6. But the Sentinel has a printing press. We can publish the evidence, get it out before Brennan can stop us." He'll have men watching the newspaper, Cole said, pacing now, his military mind working through scenarios. He's not stupid. He knows that's where Daniel would take the documents. There's another way, Daniel said. He gestured toward the satchel. I have copies of everything. The photographs, the witness statements, the financial records showing Brennan's weapon sales and the water poisoning. Everything. I sent the originals to a hiding place weeks ago. Even if Brennan gets these copies, Emma can still publish. Where? Cole asked. Weeping Cave, Daniel said. An old mining tunnel 15 miles northeast of Helena. It floods every spring, which is why the miners abandoned it. But in winter, it's dry and safe. I have a waterproof trunk hidden there with all the original documents. Cole nodded slowly, a hiding place that only Daniel and Emma knew about. That was smart. That gave them options. So we have two choices, Cole said, thinking out loud. We can try to reach Helena and Emma before Brennan does. Or we can go to Weeping Cave, get the documents, and use them to draw Brennan into a trap. Or both, Catherine said. Daniel and I can go to the cave while you ride to Helena and warn Emma. We split up, move fast, make it harder for Brennan to track us all. It was a good plan, the kind of tactical thinking Cole appreciated, but it meant separating, meant trusting that Catherine and Daniel could handle themselves if they ran into trouble. You're wounded, Cole said to Catherine, and he's hypothermic. Neither of you should be riding anywhere. We're going anyway, Catherine said, and there was steel in her voice. This is our fight as much as yours. Brennan tried to kill my husband. He shot me with an arrow and left me to bleed out. I'm not hiding in this cabin while he gets away with it. Cole looked at Daniel, who nodded agreement despite the way his hands shook. She's right. We do this together or not at all. 22 years of riding alone had taught Cole the value of self-reliance, but they had also taught him the limits of what one man could accomplish. Sometimes you needed allies. Sometimes you had to trust. All right, he said. We split up. I go to Helena, find Emma, keep her safe. You two go to Weeping Cave, get the documents. Then meet me in Helena. We publish everything all at once in every newspaper we can reach. Make it so big that Brennan can't cover it up. There's one more thing, Daniel said. He pulled a small metal object from his pocket and held it out. It was a medal, tarnished with age, hanging from a faded ribbon. Cole recognized it immediately. First place, marksmanship. Lieutenant Cole Hartwell, 1862. His sharpshooter medal from the Army. He had given it to Sarah the day before shipping out, told her to keep it safe until he came home. He had not seen it since Valley Forge, had assumed it was lost with everything else. Emma's had this for 22 years, Daniel said. Kept it with her always. Said it was proof her father was a hero, even when everyone else said he was dead. Cole took the medal, his vision blurring with tears he could not quite control. The ribbon was worn thin, the metal scratched and dented. But Emma had kept it. For 22 years, she had kept a piece of him close. When you see her, Daniel said softly, you give that back. You tell her you've come home. Cole nodded, unable to speak. He tucked the medal into his shirt pocket, right over his heart, and felt its weight like a promise. Outside, the storm was breaking. The wind had dropped to a whisperer, and through gaps in the clouds, stars were beginning to appear. It was still cold, still dangerous, but the worst had passed. We leave at first light, Cole said. 3 hours to prepare. Then we ride. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of activity. Weapons cleaned and loaded, supplies packed, horses rested and fed. Catherine rebandaged her shoulder, and Daniel worked feeling back into his frost-nipped fingers. Cole checked and rechecked his gear with the compulsiveness of a man who had survived. By paying attention to details, when the eastern sky began to lighten, they were ready. 3 riders on 3 horses, each carrying weapons and hope in roughly equal measure. They stood together in the pre-dawn cold, breath steaming, and Cole felt something he had not felt in 22 years. He felt like he was part of something larger than himself, part of a cause, part of a family. For Valley Forge, Daniel said, raising his hand. For Emma, Catherine added. For justice, Cole finished. Then they mounted and rode their separate ways into the breaking dawn, each carrying a piece of the truth that would either save them or damn them. Behind them, the cabin stood empty and silent, a temporary refuge now abandoned. Ahead lay Helena and Weeping Cave, and Colonel Silas Brennan with his lies and his guns. But ahead also lay Emma, alive and searching, carrying her father's medal and her mother's scarf, and a determination that had sustained her through 11 years of not knowing. Cole touched the medal over his heart and urged Ranger into a gallop. The sun broke over the mountains, turning the snow to gold, and for the first time in 2 decades, Cole Hartwell rode toward hope instead of away from grief. The reckoning was coming, but this time he would not face it alone. The journey to Helena took Cole through country he knew well but had not ridden in 5 years. The mountains gave way to rolling foothills, then to the broad valley where the territorial capital sat like a jewel in a crown of snow-covered peaks. The storm had passed completely now, leaving behind a world scrubbed, clean, and brilliant. The kind of cold, clear morning that made every breath feel like swallowing knives. Ranger had settled into the ground-eating lope that characterized his breed, a pace that could be maintained for hours without breaking the horse down. Cole let him choose his speed, trusting the animal's judgment about footing and fatigue. They had been together long enough that each knew the other's capabilities, the unspoken partnership that develops between a good horse and a careful rider. The sun climbed toward noon, and with it the temperature rose above zero for the first time in 3 days. Ice began to drip from tree branches, creating a constant patter like rain. The snow remained deep, but had developed a crust that sometimes held Ranger's weight and sometimes broke through, making travel unpredictable and slow. Cole's mind worked as he rode, turning over possibilities and plans like a gambler examining cards. Brennan would have men in Helena, that was certain. The colonel had always been thorough about controlling his territory, and a territorial capital meant access to telegraphs, newspapers, legal authority. Brennan would have bought or intimidated enough people to make him functionally untouchable through normal channels, which meant the channels would have to be abnormal. The first sign that Helena was more than just another frontier town came in the form of a road. Not a trail or a track, but an actual graded road with ditches on either side for drainage. The territorial government had spent money here, investing in infrastructure that suggested permanence rather than the temporary boom and bust of mining camps. Other travelers began to appear. A freight wagon hauling lumber, the teamster hunched against the cold. A family in a covered wagon, heading west with everything they owned, tied down under canvas. Two cowboys riding together, their gear suggesting they were between jobs and looking for work in town. Cole pulled his hat lower and kept his eyes down. Just another drifter among many. Nothing to draw attention, nothing to suggest he was anything but what he appeared to be. The town itself appeared gradually, buildings spreading out from a central core along a creek that the locals called Last Chance Gulch. The name came from the gold rush 20 years earlier, when this had been the last chance for prospectors who had failed everywhere else. Some had struck it rich, most had not, but enough wealth had flowed through to build something more substantial than the usual collection of tents and shanties. Helena in winter was a city of contrasts. Grand buildings with false fronts and glass windows stood beside rough log structures that predated them by decades. The main street was wide enough for 2 freight wagons to pass, lined with businesses that catered to both the wealthy mine owners and the working men who made their fortunes possible. Hotels, saloons, general stores, a bank with bars on the windows and guards at the door. And there, on a corner where 2 main streets intersected, stood a 2-story brick building with a sign that read Montana Sentinel in bold letters across the facade. Cole reined Ranger to a stop 2 blocks away, using the shelter of a livery stable to study the newspaper office. He had learned long ago that patience was often the difference between success and failure, between living and dying. So he watched. The watching paid off within 10 minutes. 2 men sat at a cafe across from the Sentinel, ostensibly drinking coffee and reading newspapers. But their attention kept drifting to the newspaper office, and they sat positioned where they could see both the front door and the side alley. Watchers. Brennan's men, almost certainly. Cole shifted his attention to the rooftops and found another man there lying prone with a rifle. The position gave him clear fields of fire to all the approaches to the Sentinel. Professional work, military positioning, 3 men that Cole could see, probably more that he could not. Brennan had locked down the newspaper office tight, waiting for either Daniel or Emma to show up. The trap was set, baited, and ready to spring. which meant Cole needed another approach. He backed Ranger away from his observation point and circled around to the residential area behind the commercial district. The houses here were modest but well-maintained, homes of clerks and shopkeepers, people who worked for wages rather than profits. A church stood at the end of one street, white painted wood with a small bell tower. Next to the church was a boarding house, 3 stories of weathered pine with a sign advertising rooms by the week or month. Cole tied Ranger at the rail and went inside, where a widow woman in her 60s looked up from her knitting with the kind of sharp-eyed assessment that came from years of evaluating potential tenants. "Need a room," Cole said, pulling coins from his pocket. "Just for tonight, maybe 2. She quoted a price that was fair but not cheap. Cole paid without haggling, and she gave him a key and pointed him toward the stairs. "Second floor, end of the hall. No drinking, no fighting, no women after 9 o'clock. "Yes, ma'am," Cole said, recognizing the tone of a woman who had laid down those rules before and would enforce them with a broom handle if necessary. The room was small but clean, with a bed, a chair, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Cole dropped his saddlebags on the bed and went to the window, studying the view. From here, he could see the back of the Sentinel building, 2 blocks away. There was an alley behind it and a door that probably led to the print shop. A plan began to form. Cole left the boarding house and walked the streets of Helena like a man with no particular destination, just another drifter, killing time. But his eyes were working constantly, cataloging details. The layout of the streets, the positions of Brennan's watchers, the comings and goings at the Sentinel. He found what he was looking for in a store that sold used goods, the accumulated detritus of people who had struck it rich and moved on or gone bust and sold everything. The proprietor was an old man who looked like he had been old when Montana was still wild, his face a map of wrinkles and his hands spotted with age. "Help you?" the old man asked, not getting up from his chair by the stove. "Need different clothes," Cole said, "something that doesn't look like a cowboy." The old man's eyes sharpened slightly, the first sign of real interest. "Running from something or running to something?" "Does it matter?" A dry chuckle. "Not to me. I got a suit belonged to a lawyer who died of consumption last month. Never been worn much. Might fit you if you're not particular about the smell of camphor." The suit was black wool, well made but showing wear at the elbows and knees. It came with a white shirt that had yellowed slightly and a black vest. Cole paid for them and changed in the back room, emerging transformed from cowboy to businessman. The old man provided a derby hat to complete the disguise, and Cole barely recognized himself in the cracked mirror. "Shave that stubble and you'd pass for a banker," the old man observed. "What you planning that needs such a change?" "Nothing illegal," Cole said, which was not quite true but not quite a lie either. "Uh-huh." The old man did not look convinced. "Well, whatever you're doing, you be careful. Town's full of hard men last few days, the kind that get paid to hurt people." Cole nodded his thanks and left, carrying his cowboy clothes in a bundle. He returned to the boarding house, shaved carefully using the washstand and a bar of soap, then studied himself in the small mirror above the basin. The transformation was remarkable. Without the trail dust and stubble, without the weathered clothes and gun belt, he looked like exactly what the suit suggested. A businessman, a lawyer perhaps, or a land agent, someone who would not draw a second glance in a territorial capital. The sun was setting when Cole made his move. He had spent the afternoon watching the Sentinel from various positions, learning the routines of Brennan's watchers. They changed shift at 6 o'clock, the evening men replacing the day crew with a brief overlap where attention was divided. Cole walked toward the newspaper office during that overlap, moving with the purposeful stride of a man who belonged exactly where he was. The 2 men at the cafe glanced at him, assessed him, dismissed him. Just another businessman heading home after a day's work. He walked past the Sentinel's front door without slowing, continued around the corner to the alley, and only then did he pause. The back door was locked, but the lock was simple, the kind that could be opened with a piece of wire if you knew what you were doing. Cole knew what he was doing. 30 seconds later, he was inside, closing the door quietly behind him. The back room of the Sentinel was dominated by a printing press, a massive iron machine that smelled of ink and oil and metal. Type cases lined one wall, each small drawer filled with lead letters organized by size and font. Paper was stacked in neat reams, and the floor was littered with discarded sheets bearing errors or test runs. Cole moved through the print shop into the main office area, where desks held typewriters and filing cabinets held what he assumed were back issues and correspondence. Everything was neat, organized, the workspace of people who took their profession seriously. But the office was empty. No workers, no journalists. The silence was complete except for the ticking of a clock on the wall and the distant sounds of the street outside. Cole was turning to leave when he heard it, a footstep on the stairs that led to the second floor. Then another, someone descending slowly, carefully, trying not to make noise. His hand went to his hip before he remembered he was not wearing his gun belt, had left the Colt and Winchester in his room at the boarding house. All he had was the Bowie knife tucked into his boot. He drew it smoothly, the blade whispering against leather. A figure appeared at the bottom of the stairs, young, female, dressed in a practical skirt and white blouse. She carried a revolver in her right hand, a small derringer that was mostly useless beyond 10 feet but deadly up close. Her eyes were wide, frightened but determined. And she looked exactly like Sarah. The resemblance hit Cole like a physical blow. Same auburn hair, though Emma wore hers pulled back in a practical bun. Same green eyes, though these were harder than Sarah's had ever been, aged by experiences Cole could only imagine. Same delicate bone structure of the face, the same way of holding her head slightly tilted when assessing a situation. Emma, Cole said, his voice breaking on the name. The revolver wavered slightly. How do you know my name? Because you're my daughter, Cole said, and I've been looking for you for 22 years. Emma's hand tightened on the derringer. That's not possible. My father died at Valley Forge. That's what they told you, Cole said softly. That's what Jonathan Kendricks told you because he thought it would keep you safe. But I didn't die, Emma. I survived. And I've thought about you every single day since. He reached slowly into his shirt pocket, moving carefully so as not to spook her, and withdrew the metal. He held it up where she could see it in the fading light from the windows. Emma's breath caught. The derringer lowered slightly. That's mine. I gave that to Daniel to keep safe. He gave it to me 2 days ago, Cole said. Told me to return it to you. Told me to tell you I've come home. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 22 years of questions and grief and hope. Emma's eyes moved there from the metal to Cole's face, searching for something she recognized, some echo of memory from when she was 5 years old. Prove it, she said finally. Tell me something only my father would know. Cole thought back, reaching for memories that felt like they belonged to a different life. You had a scar, he said, back of your right knee. Got it when you were 3, climbing on the fence and fell. It was shaped like a crescent moon. Emma's free hand moved unconsciously toward her knee. How could you know that? Because I was there when it happened, Cole said. Because I carried you to your mother and held you while she cleaned the cut and bandaged it. Because you cried for 10 minutes and then laughed because I made funny faces to distract you. His voice roughened. Because you were my daughters then, and you're my daughter now, and nothing Brennan did could change that. The derringer fell from Emma's hand, clattering on the wooden floor. She stared at Cole, tears beginning to stream down her face, and he saw the moment when belief overcame doubt, when the impossible became real. Papa? The word was barely a whisper. Yes, baby girl, Cole said. It's me. Emma crossed the distance between them in 3 quick steps and threw her arms around him, and Cole held his daughter for the first time in 22 years. She was taller than he expected, strong and solid, no longer the little girl from his memories, but a woman grown. But she was still his Emma, still his daughter, and the years fell away like shed skin. They stood like that for a long moment, neither willing to let go, both afraid this was a dream that would vanish with waking. Finally, Emma pulled back slightly, wiping tears from her face with the back of her hand. They told me you were dead, she said. Uncle Jonathan, he said you died from your wounds 3 days after the massacre. Said he buried you next to Mother. He lied to protect you, Cole said. Brennan was hunting survivors. If you knew I was alive, you might have tried to find me. Might have led him right to you. Emma's jaw tightened, anger flashing in her eyes. He let me believe you were dead for 22 years. Let me grow up thinking I was alone. He raised you, Cole said gently. Kept you safe. That counts for something. He's dead now, Emma said. About 3 weeks ago. Heart attack, they said. But I think Brennan had him killed. Cole nodded. He had suspected as much from what Daniel told him. Brennan kills everyone who knows the truth. It's what he does. Not anymore, Emma said with fierce determination. Daniel and I have been gathering evidence for 6 months. We have everything. The photographs from Valley Forge, witness statements, financial records showing his weapons sales, proof of the water poisoning. She gestured toward the stairs. It's all upstairs in the safe. Cole glanced toward the windows where dusk was deepening into night. Brennan has men watching this building. 3 that I saw, probably more. They're waiting for you or Daniel to show up. Let them wait, Emma said. We're not publishing here anyway. This office is compromised, but I have a contact at the Cedar Creek Times 40 miles west. Small paper, but honest. We can print there. Well, soon it was a good plan, the kind of tactical thinking that reminded Cole of himself at that age. But there was a problem. Brennan knows who you are, Cole said, knows what you look like. If you try to leave Helena, his men will follow. They'll kill you before you get 10 miles. Emma smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Then we make sure they follow someone else. Segment 9. The Deception. The plan came together quickly, built on layers of misdirection and timing. Emma explained that the Sentinel had a network of correspondents throughout the territory, young journalists who filed stories by telegraph or delivered them by hand. One of these correspondents, a woman named Sarah Morrison, was approximately Emma's height and build with similar colored hair. We use her as a decoy, Emma said, her mind working through the details with the speed of someone who had planned for exactly this kind of contingency. Dress her in my clothes. Have her leave the building through the front door, carrying a satchel. Brennan's men will follow her while we slip out the back. And Morrison, Cole asked? She'll be in danger. She'll lead them on a wild chase to the train station, then double back through alleys she knows better than they do. Sarah grew up in Helena, knows every back street and hidden passage. She'll lose them within 20 minutes. Cole had to admit it was elegant. Simple plans were usually the best plans. Less to go wrong. Where is this Morrison woman now? Upstairs, Emma said, hiding. When Brennan's men started watching the building 3 days ago, I had all the staff go to ground. Sarah stayed because she refused to leave me alone. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, where the editorial offices were located. The space was larger than Cole expected, with 6 desks and walls covered in maps and newspaper clippings. A safe sat in one corner, its door hanging open to reveal stacks of documents and photographs. Sarah Morrison sat at one of the desks, a revolver resting beside a half-eaten sandwich. She was perhaps 25, with brown hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that assessed Cole with the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust easily. This is him? She asked Emma. Your father? This is him, Emma confirmed. Sarah stood and extended her hand to Cole, her grip firm and businesslike. Sarah Morrison. I've been helping Emma investigate Valley Forge for 3 months now. I've read every document, seen every photograph. What Brennan did should see him hanged. It will, Cole said with quiet certainty. But first we need to get Emma and these documents out of Helena. Sarah nodded. Emma explained the plan. I'll play decoy, lead Brennan's watchers away while you two escape. But I need to know something first. She turned to Emma. If I do this, if I help you publish this story, my career in Helena is over. Brennan has too many friends here. I'll be blacklisted. Maybe worse. Come with us to Cedar Creek, Emma said. I'll get you a position at the Times. Better than that, I'll make you co-author on the biggest story to hit Montana in 20 years. Your name will be in every newspaper in the country. Sarah considered this, then smiled. When you put it that way, how can I refuse? The next hour was spent in careful preparation. Sarah dressed in Emma's distinctive green traveling dress and matching hat, creating a silhouette that would be recognizable from a distance. She packed a satchel with newspapers and random documents, enough weight to suggest it contained something valuable. Emma, meanwhile, changed into a simple gray dress that could belong to anyone, pulling her hair back under a plain bonnet. Cole retrieved his cowboy clothes and guns from the boarding house, changing in the newspaper office while the women finalized their preparations. The suit had served its purpose, but what came next required a man to be armed and ready for violence. When the clock struck 8, They were ready. Sarah descended the stairs first, moving with exaggerated caution, playing the part of someone trying not to be seen. She paused at the door, took a deep breath, then stepped out into the street. From the second-floor window, Cole and Emma watched as Brennan's watchers reacted. The two men at the cafe stood immediately, one tossing coins on the table, while the other made a subtle hand signal to someone Cole could not see. Sarah walked briskly toward the center of town, and the watchers followed at a discreet distance. "Now," Emma said. They descended the back stairs and emerged into the alley behind the Sentinel. The night was cold and clear, stars brilliant overhead in the way they only were in winter. Cole had retrieved Ranger from the livery stable earlier, and the horse waited patiently in the shadows. Emma produced her own mount, a gray mare named Smoke, from a shed behind the building. They rode west, taking alleys and back streets that Emma knew from years of working in Helena. The town fell away behind them, replaced by open country, painted silver by starlight. Only when they were a mile out did Cole allow himself to believe they had made it. "They'll figure it out eventually," Emma said, echoing his thoughts. "When Sarah loses them, when they realize it was a trick. But by then we'll have hours of head start," Cole replied. "Enough to make Cedar Creek if we push the horses." "Not Cedar Creek," Emma said, surprising him. "Not yet. First we go to Weeping Cave, get the original documents. Then we have everything in one place. Can't be separated if something goes wrong." Cole started to object, then realized she was right. Better to consolidate their evidence before making the final push to publish. "How far?" 15 miles northeast, Emma said. "There's an old mining road that's barely used anymore. We can make it by midnight if we hurry." They urged their horses to a faster pace, moving from walk to trot to canter. The cold air bit at exposed skin, but both riders ignored it, focused on the goal ahead. Cole found himself glancing at Emma repeatedly, still unable to quite believe she was real, that she was here riding beside him after 22 years of absence. "Tell me about yourself," he said after they had ridden in silence for half an hour. "What you've done, who you've become." Emma was quiet for a moment, organizing thoughts. "Uncle Jonathan raised me in Philadelphia," she finally said. "Sent me to good schools, made sure I had opportunities. When I turned 16, he told me the truth about Valley Forge, about you and Mother. Said he had kept me away from Montana because Brennan would have killed me if he knew I survived." "Smart man," Cole said. "I suppose," Emma agreed, though her voice held bitterness. "But he also told me you were dead. Let me waste years mourning a ghost when I could have been searching for you." "You searched anyway," Cole observed. "Once I learned the body count didn't match the casualty list," Emma said. "There were supposed to be 48 bodies at Valley Forge, 47 civilians and 1 soldier. But the Army only recovered 46. Someone was missing from the count." Cole felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You figured out I survived from math?" "From inconsistencies," Emma corrected. "The Army buried the bodies quickly, didn't keep good records. But the local undertaker did. He counted 46 bodies, not 47. And there was a report of a wounded soldier being seen in the area days after the massacre. I tracked down every lead, followed every thread." The determination in her voice, the methodical approach to investigation, reminded Cole painfully of Sarah. His wife had been like that, tenacious and thorough, unwilling to let mysteries remain unsolved. "When did you become a journalist?" Cole asked. 6 years ago, Emma said. "Started as a typist at the Philadelphia Inquirer, worked my way up to reporter. Specialized in corruption investigations, government fraud. Made enough enemies that when Daniel Wade offered me a position at the Sentinel, I jumped at the chance. Thought maybe I could find the truth about Valley Forge if I was based in Montana." "And you did," Cole said. "We did," Emma corrected. Daniel had been investigating Brennan for years, had fragments of information but nothing complete. When I showed up with my research, we realized we were working on the same story from different angles. We combined everything, filled in the gaps. 6 months ago, we had enough to publish." "Why didn't you?" Cole asked. Emma's hands tightened on the reins. "Because we didn't have you, the lone survivor, the witness who could testify to what actually happened. Without you, Brennan could claim the photographs were staged, the documents forged. With you, he has no defense." The weight of that settled on Cole's shoulders. For 22 years, he had carried the burden of being the only survivor, the only one who knew the truth. Now that truth had value, could be weaponized against the man who had created it. There's something else, Emma said quietly. Something I need to tell you before we go any further. Cole heard the hesitation in Erebus, the careful approach to difficult information. What is it? Brennan isn't working alone, Emma said. He never was. There's a man in Washington, a senator named William Hollister. He's Brennan's partner in the weapons sales and the water poisoning. Everything we've uncovered points to him as the real power behind the operation. The name meant nothing to Cole, but the implication was clear. How high does this go? High enough that Hollister is considering a presidential run in '88, Emma said. High enough that if we expose him, we shake the entire territorial government, maybe the federal government too. Cole absorbed this, his tactical mind working through the ramifications. They were not just fighting one man anymore. They were taking on an entire network of power and corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. Does Daniel know about Hollister? Cole asked. He's the one who uncovered the connection, Emma said. Found financial records showing payments from Hollister to Brennan going back 20 years. Found correspondence discussing the water poisoning, the weapons sales, even Valley Forge. And where is Daniel now? Cole asked, realizing he had not thought to ask earlier. Emma's expression clouded. He and his wife Catherine were supposed to meet me in Helena 2 days ago. They never showed up. No word, no message. I've been terrified that Brennan got to them. Relief washed through Cole. They're alive, he said. I found them. Catherine was wounded, but I treated her. Daniel nearly drowned, but we got him out in time. They're headed to Weeping Cave right now to get the documents. Should arrive around the same time we do. Emma's breath came out in a rush. Thank God. I thought I was alone in this. You're not alone, Cole said firmly. Not anymore. We do this together. They rode in companionable silence after that, father and daughter reunited by tragedy and bound by purpose. The miles fell away beneath their horses' hooves, and ahead in the darkness, Weeping Cave waited with its secrets and its evidence. Behind them in Helena, Sarah Morrison led Brennan's watchers on a merry chase through alleys and back streets before finally vanishing into a maze of tunnels that connected the oldest buildings in town. By the time the watchers realized they had been fooled, Emma and Cole had a 3-hour head start. But Brennan was not a man who gave up easily, and when he learned he had been deceived, his response would be swift and brutal. Segment 10, The Convergence. Weeping Cave earned its name from the constant dripping of water through limestone, creating formations that looked like frozen tears on the cave walls. The entrance was hidden behind a screen of bare willows, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. A creek ran past the entrance, its banks thick with ice that caught moonlight and threw it back in shards of silver. Cole and Emma arrived first, dismounting at the creek's edge and leading their horses through the willows. The cave mouth was larger than Cole expected, easily 12 feet high and twice that wide. Water dripped from the ceiling with a rhythmic patter that echoed deeper into the darkness. We need light, Emma said, pulling a bundle of candles from her saddlebag. She lit 3 with matches, handing 1 to Cole and keeping 2 for herself. The flickering illumination pushed back the darkness, but also made the shadows dance and shift, creating the illusion of movement where there was only stone. The passage into the mountain was straight for the first 100 feet, then began to twist and turn, following some ancient watercourse that had carved the limestone over millennia. The walls were wet and slick, the floor uneven with pools of standing water that reflected the candle flames like mirrors. 200 feet in, the passage opened into a chamber roughly 15 feet across. In the center of this chamber sat a metal trunk, watertight and locked with a heavy padlock. Emma produced a key from her pocket and opened it, revealing stacks of documents, photographs, and ledgers. This is everything, she said, her voice hushed in the enclosed space. The complete record of Brennan's crimes going back 22 years. Cole knelt beside the trunk and carefully lifted one of the photograph albums. The images inside made his stomach turn. Valley Forge, the execution line, bodies in the snow. But there were other photographs too, more recent ones showing water wells with dead cattle around them, native villages with bodies laid out in rows, miners dead in their tents. Hollister ordered all of it, Emma said, kneeling beside him. We have his letters, his financial records, everything. He's been creating conflicts for 20 years, selling weapons to both sides, then buying up the land cheap after everyone's dead. How many? Cole asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Over 300 confirmed deaths, Emma said. Probably double that if we count the ones we can't prove. Whole villages poisoned, settlements wiped out, all for profit. The number was staggering, almost incomprehensible. 300 people murdered in cold blood, their deaths orchestrated by men in comfortable offices hundreds of miles away. Valley Forge had been terrible, but it was just the beginning. Just the first chapter in a story of greed and murder that had been playing out for 2 decades. The sound of approaching horses pulled Cole from his dark thoughts. He drew his Colt and moved to the cave entrance, Emma right behind him with her Derringer. But the voices that called out were familiar. Emma, it's Daniel. Catherine and I are here. Cole holstered his weapon and stepped into the moonlight. Daniel and Catherine Wade sat their horses at the creek's edge, both looking worn and tired but alive. Daniel had regained some color, though he still moved stiffly. Catherine's arm was in a proper sling now, the bandages fresh and clean. Thank God, Emma said, rushing to embrace Daniel carefully. When you didn't show up in Helena, I thought the worst. Nearly was the worst, Daniel admitted, but your father saved us. Both of us. Catherine dismounted and approached Cole, extending her good hand. I never properly thanked you for what you did. For both of us. Cole shook her hand. You can thank me by helping us finish this. Brennan needs to answer for what he's done. He will, Catherine said with quiet determination. We'll make sure of it. We need to work fast, Daniel said, glancing toward the cave entrance. Copy the most critical documents while we can. They spent the next 30 minutes organizing the documents, creating multiple copies of the most damning evidence. They spent the next hour organizing the documents, creating multiple copies of the most damning evidence. Emma had brought her camera, and they took photographs of photographs, ensuring that even if one set was destroyed, others would survive. Daniel contributed his own notes and witness statements, adding to the already substantial pile of evidence. It was methodical work, the kind of careful preparation that would make the difference between a story that could be dismissed and one that could not be ignored. They sorted everything into categories: Valley Forge, water poisoning, weapon sales, financial records, correspondence. Each category was further divided by date and location. When Brennan's voice echoed from the cave depths, they had managed to create 3 sets of the most critical documents. Each person took one, ensuring that even if captured, the truth would survive. We ride for Cedar Creek at first light, Daniel said. Get there by evening if we push. Print the special edition overnight, distribute it the next morning. By noon the day after tomorrow, every newspaper in the territory will have this story. It was a good plan, solid and achievable, but Cole could not shake the feeling that something was wrong, that they were missing a piece of the puzzle. Brennan won't just let us walk away, he said. He'll come after us, and when he does, he'll come in force. Let him come, Emma said, her voice hard. We have the truth on our side. Truth doesn't stop bullets, Cole replied. He had seen too many good people die because they believed righteousness would protect them. We need to be smart about this. Careful. As if in answer to his concerns, a sound echoed through the cave. Not the drip of water or the rustle of wind, but something more ominous. The metallic click of a gun being cocked. I'm afraid it's too late for careful, said a voice from deeper in the cave. A voice Cole recognized even after 22 years. Drop your weapons or I start shooting. Colonel Silas Brennan stepped into the candlelight, his Remington revolver aimed steadily at Emma's chest. Behind him came 3 more men, armed, all positioned to cover the group in the chamber. They had come through another entrance, one that Cole and the others had not known existed. You always were thorough, Cole said, his hand hovering near his Colt but not touching it. Not yet. Thorough enough to know about the back entrance to this cave, Brennan agreed. Thorough enough to have men watching every approach to Helena, waiting for you to make your move. His cold blue eyes swept across the group. You've cost me considerable trouble, Hartwell. 3 good men dead because of you. I'm going to enjoy making you pay for that. You can't kill all of us, Daniel said. Too many witnesses. Too many people who know what you've done. Brennan smiled, and there was no warmth in it. I've been killing witnesses for 22 years, Mr. Wade. I'm quite accomplished at it. As for people knowing what I've done, well, dead men tell no tales, and that trunk full of evidence you've been so carefully organizing, I'll burn it before sunrise. Emma's hand moved toward the derringer tucked in her belt, but one of Brennan's men shifted his rifle in her direction. I wouldn't, he said. The standoff held for a long moment, everyone frozen in position. Cole's mind raced through options and found none that did not end in bloodshed. 6 armed people in close quarters, all with their fingers near triggers. If shooting started, half of them would be dead before the echoes faded. But then Catherine Wade did something unexpected. She laughed. You fool, she said to Brennan, her voice filled with contempt. You absolute fool. You think we brought all the evidence here? You think we're that stupid? Brennan's expression flickered with uncertainty. You're bluffing. Am I? Catherine pulled a folded paper from her pocket with her good hand. This looks like a telegraph receipt, dated 3 days ago, sent to the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, and 12 other newspapers. Every one of them received a summary of your crimes along with instructions on where to find corroborating evidence if something happens to us. It was a bluff, Cole realized, a magnificent bluff delivered with perfect confidence. But would Brennan believe it? The colonel's face went pale, then red. You're lying. Wade wouldn't send evidence to other papers before securing his own exclusive. Daniel wouldn't, Catherine agreed, but I would, and I did. 3 days ago, while you were busy watching the Sentinel and hunting my husband. I sent everything. If you kill us, all you do is confirm the story. Every newspaper in America will be investigating you within a week. The silence stretched. Cole watched Brennan's face, saw the calculation happening behind those cold blue eyes, saw the moment when certainty gave way to doubt. Burn the trunk anyway, Brennan finally said to one of his men. Destroy the evidence. We'll deal with the newspapers later. But as the man moved toward the trunk, the cave entrance erupted with gunfire. Shots rang out from multiple positions, bullets ricocheting off stone and throwing up chips of rock. Brennan's men dove for cover, returning fire blindly into the darkness. Cole used the confusion to draw his Colt and fire 3 shots at the nearest gunman, dropping him. Emma pulled her derringer and shot another. Daniel grabbed Catherine and pulled her behind a rock formation, shielding her with his body. And through the chaos came a figure Cole had not expected to see. Ista, the old Cheyenne woman, accompanied by 6 young warriors armed with Winchester rifles. They poured fire into the cave with disciplined precision, forcing Brennan and his remaining men back deeper into the passages. Go, Ista shouted. Take the evidence and go. We hold them here. Cole did not question the miracle. He grabbed the trunk while Emma and Daniel helped Catherine to her feet. They ran for the cave entrance as bullets whined around them, the warriors providing covering fire that kept Brennan's men pinned down. Outside, they found horses waiting, held by more of Ista's people. They tied the trunk to a pack horse and mounted, spurring their animals into motion before Brennan could reorganize and pursue. Behind them, the sound of gunfire continued for another minute, then stopped abruptly. Cole heard Brennan's voice, cursing in rage, but the colonel was pinned down deep in the cave with no way out except past Ista's warriors. 3 days later, federal marshals arrested Colonel Silas Brennan near the Canadian border. He had escaped the cave through a back tunnel, but Ista's warriors had wounded 2 of his men. He was alone when they found him, exhausted and defeated. Cole risked a glance back and saw Ista standing at the cave entrance, watching them go. She raised one hand in farewell, then disappeared back into the darkness. They rode hard through the night, putting as many miles as possible between themselves and Weeping Cave. No one spoke, all of them processing what had just happened, how close they had come to death. Finally, as dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Emma broke the silence. How did Ista know? How did she know to be there? Cole thought about the old woman's mysterious knowledge, her seeming ability to be exactly where she needed to be. I don't know, he admitted, but I'm grateful she was. The Telegraph, Daniel said suddenly. Catherine, did you really send evidence to other newspapers? Catherine smiled tiredly. No, but Brennan didn't know that. All I needed was to plant enough doubt to make him hesitate. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, Emma said with genuine admiration. Or the most foolish, Catherine replied. But it bought us time. Now we have to use it. Ahead, the town of Cedar Creek appeared on the horizon, small but solid, with buildings that spoke of permanence rather than the temporary feel of mining camps. Somewhere in that town was a printing press, and with it, the power to tell the truth to the world. Cole touched the metal over his heart, felt its weight like a promise kept. They had the evidence. They had survived. Now all that remained was to publish the truth and let justice take its course. But in his gut, Cole knew this was not over. Brennan would not give up, would not surrender quietly. There would be one more confrontation, one final reckoning. And when it came, Cole intended to be ready. Segment 11, Justice Served. Cedar Creek Times was small, but its press was solid. By dawn, they had printed 2,000 copies. By noon, 5,000 more. The headline screamed across every page. Valley Forge Massacre Exposed. Senator Hollister's 22-year conspiracy. Telegraph operators worked through the night. Within hours, the story reached every territorial capital. By morning, it hit Washington. By afternoon, the New York Times had picked it up. By evening, the entire nation knew. 3 days later, federal marshals arrested Colonel Silas Brennan near the Canadian border. He stood trial in Helena that spring. The evidence was overwhelming. 47 counts of murder, weapons trafficking, conspiracy to commit mass murder through poisoning. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. On a cold March morning, they hanged him in the Helena town square. Cole Hartwell stood in the crowd, Emma beside him, Daniel and Catherine behind them. They watched in silence as the trap door fell and Silas Brennan paid his debt. Is it over? Emma asked quietly. Cole thought about Sarah, about 22 years of searching, about all the lives destroyed by one man's greed. For him, yes. For us, it's just beginning. Senator William Hollister resigned his seat before formal charges could be filed. His presidential ambitions died with the scandal. Within 6 months, 17 government officials were prosecuted. The weapons trafficking network collapsed. The water poisoning stopped. Valley Forge finally had its justice. Returned to present, 1910. The fire had burned to embers in the hearth. Outside, the snow had stopped. Stars broke through the clouds, bright and cold over the Montana mountains. Tommy sat motionless, absorbing the weight of his grandfather's story. So you found Grandma Emma, the boy said finally, and you stopped the colonel. We stopped, assisted him, Cole corrected. All of us together. Your grandmother, Daniel, and Catherine. Even old Ista. One person couldn't have done it alone. Tommy looked at the Colt on the table with new eyes. And the gun, you said it killed people. 6 of Brennan's men, Cole said. The last shots I ever fired at another human being. That was 25 years ago. Some tools are meant to be retired. Footsteps in the hall. Emma appeared in the doorway, older now, but still strong at 52. Her hair had threads of gray, but her eyes were the same eyes that had stared down Brennan in that cave. Telling him the old stories, she asked. He asked about the gun, Cole said. Emma crossed the room and placed her hand on her father's shoulder, the shoulder that had once carried an arrow wound, that had carried the weight of 22 years of grief. Then he deserves the truth. All of it. What happened to Daniel and Catherine? Tommy asked. And Ista? Daniel still runs the Sentinel, Emma said. Catherine works with him. They're in their 60s now, but they haven't slowed down, still printing truth, still holding the powerful accountable. And Ista? Cole smiled. Last I heard, she was teaching the old ways to a new generation. 97 years old and still sharp as that arrow she gave me. Emma knelt beside Tommy. The lesson isn't about the shooting, Tommy. It's about the choices we make when everything seems lost. Cole nodded. We could have chosen revenge, could have just killed Brennan and been done with it, but that wouldn't have stopped the corruption, wouldn't have saved the others he would have killed. We chose justice, Emma said. We chose to expose the truth, even when it was dangerous. We chose family over everything else. Tommy absorbed this, young mind wrestling with adult concepts. Would you do it again, if you had to? Cole looked at Emma, at the life they had built from the ashes of Valley Forge. 25 years of making up for lost time. 25 years of justice served. Every single day, he said. Outside, the Montana night stretched, vast and infinite. Somewhere in those mountains, an old Cheyenne woman added another mark to her winter count. A story of arrows and truth, of fathers and daughters, of justice delayed but not denied. The past would never be forgotten, but it no longer held them prisoner. And that was the truest freedom of all. The end.